It's interesting about Robert Mugabe. Obviously, he fought a very bitter war against the colonial power Ian Smith's Rhodesia, but against the British, well, effectively. But his view of Britain was always extremely conflict. I mean, he was a great admirer, for instance, of the British parliamentary system. He was a great admirer of British literature. But at the same time, once he found himself in power, he found himself increasingly in conflict, though not right at the very beginning. As we saw in one of those reports, he was trying to encourage the white inhabitants of what became Zimbabwe to stay. Only later did we move on to that period of extreme conflict with the expropriation of land from white farmers, which had a catastrophic effect on agriculture in Zimbabwe. But in many respects, his view of the European world, the British world, was not an entirely negative one.
Now, what might Theresa May mean, this might sound a little bit naive, but by oppression? She's saying the country now free of oppression.
Well, there's no doubt that for the last few decades of Robert Mugabe's rule, last couple of decades of Robert Mugabe's rule, he has ruled primarily through coercion. And at the same time, the economy has gone into freefall. The inflation in Zimbabwe, before it switched from its national currency to the dollar in 2008, was higher than any other country in the world. The living standards of the average person in Zimbabwe today are lower than they were in 1980 when Robert Mugabe took over. That is catastrophic for a country that at the time was probably, if not the richest country on the African continent, at least one of them. It was the breadbasket of Africa, with an extremely educated population as well. He, through his application of ideological dogma and his determination to stay on in power at all cost and against all advice, has undermined his country.
Now, Rob, we don't yet know what the terms are of... we're imagining Robert Mugabe was persuaded to resign in some sort of a deal, and he will get something in return, perhaps immunity. If he were to leave the country, where might he go, do you think?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, the deals will be being worked out at the moment. One possibility, I guess, will be South Africa, although he could be a pretty awkward guest to have. But he also owns property in Malaysia and Singapore, and it may be that the Mugabe couple could move to either Malaysia or Singapore and live there. But at this stage, we're only guessing. There are other places in Africa where he could go to as well, but I would have thought those were the most likely ones, either to Malaysia, Singapore perhaps, or to South Africa, if the South African government is prepared to take on board a guest who could be pretty awkward.
All right, thank you very much, Rob. Rob Parsons, our chief